Right, let's shift focus a tad and look at the progress report and what the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Act is doing for the continent. I'm joined by Professor John Eita from the University of Johannesburg's Department of Economics and Econometrics. Thank you very much, sir, for your time this afternoon. So we heard from Chief Olusegun Matthew Akikiolo Aremu Obasanjo a little bit earlier on at the Africa Intra-Trade Fair, saying that, you know, the African Continental Free Trade Area Act could lead to the economic emancipation and self-reliance of Africa. How do we achieve this without the free movement of people on the continent?
Thank you and good afternoon. I must mention that, yes, we are all excited about the African Continental Free Trade Area. But when it comes to regional integration, I must mention that regional integration is a process, and there are different levels of regional integration. First, you need to start with the free trade area, and then if you would like to have free movements of people, you need to move into another deeper level of regional integration, which is the common market. So we are starting as Africans with free trade area. In a free trade area, you actually liberalize or open up trade in goods and services between member states. So there will be free movements of goods and services between countries that are members of the African Continental Free Trade Area. And that is actually the start. And for us to have to allow free movement of people, we need to move deeper into another level of regional integration, which is a common market. There you have also free movement of people.
Right. Wamkele Mene, the Secretary General of AfCFTA Secretariat, noted that the EU, for them, it took 72 years to reach a level of depth of market, and that the journey to market integration is difficult. What kind of a challenge do you perceive, if any, does Beijing bring to this equation with the One Belt, One Road initiative that they have, right? So they've contributed largely to infrastructure development projects on the continent.
Yeah, I must mention that maybe just to agree with you that regional integration or deeper level of regional integration is not an easy process, because it requires commitment and it requires member states to be prepared to surrender part of their sovereignty to supranational institutions. And that is actually what we need to do if we want to achieve deeper level of regional integration in Africa. And that is what the members of the European Union did. Hence, you have the European Monetary Union and the single currency. So it requires commitment and preparedness and willingness to give up some of our sovereignty to a supranational institution. That is actually what we need to do, so that we'll be able to integrate the continent and increase intra-Africa trade.
When you say give up our sovereignty, what do you mean?
No. What I mean is that part of the sovereignty. And I think that has been a challenge. Remember, when you integrate the continent, it means that there will be some continental institutions that will play the role that used to be previously played by national institutions. So that is what I mean.
Oh, thank you very much. So the railway connecting Mombasa to Nairobi and the railway connecting Addis Ababa to Djibouti, Chinese financing. We take a look at an issue with the Libombo border post, which has been widely reported, of trucks not being able to cross into borders, whether it's Mozambique or Angola, truck drivers having to sit for 3 hours at a time in a queue, some border posts not operating 24 hours a day. These little issues that, you know, could inhibit us from reaching our potential. What do you perceive needs to be done there?
Yes. That is what the African Continental Free Trade Area is trying to achieve, to eliminate barriers to trade. Some of the barriers are tariff, some are non-tariff. So if we are able to remove those non-tariff barriers, a situation where you do not want a situation where you have trucks that wait for longer time at borders. So that really inhibits trade. And the aim of the Continental Free Trade Area is to ensure that those non-tariff barriers are eliminated in order to facilitate the flow of goods and services between member states. That is what we need to do. And once we do that, we will be able to increase intra-Africa trade. And when I say intra-Africa trade, I am referring to trade within or between Africa.
That trade within or between Africa, President Obasanjo pointing out a little bit earlier on that some of the issues that would need to be tackled include geopolitical tension. So when you take a look at what's happening at the Horn of Africa, for instance, what do you perceive some of the instability that we see in certain parts of the continent do in terms of unintended consequences and barriers to trade?
I must mention that one of the things that has been neglected in most of this trade analysis is that, you see, when you integrate countries, it becomes easier to ease the tension. Because if countries are integrated, some of these tensions could be eased. And once you ease the tension, you will be able to increase trade between these member states. And that is what the Continental Free Trade Area, which is a first step, is trying to achieve. Once we integrate the countries, it also becomes easier, or it helps in easing these tensions between member states, because the aim is to increase intra-Africa trade, which is actually very low compared to what is happening in the rest of the world. Although some commentators or some analysis have suggested that intra-Africa trade is not low as reported, because some of the informal trade are not really, you don't find them in official statistics. But I think if you look at what is happening in Africa, you look at the period 2000 to 2019, you could see that intra-Africa trade, although it has been on an upward trend from the single digit of 9% to 18%, it is still low when you compare to Asia, America, where the intra-trade between member states is more than 50% in those other regions.
What are some of the reasons for the low levels of intra-Africa trade?
Yes, thank you for that question. The reason why we have low levels of intra-Africa trade, maybe I should mention some of the reasons, is that these member states, they did not open up. They have not liberalized. They have not liberalized when it comes to trade. They did not liberalize their trade. And that is why you have lower intra-Africa trade. And some of them have, they have more trade relationships with their former colonial powers as opposed to Africa. And you realize that it is even easier to trade with the rest of the world than within Africa. That is why the Continental Free Trade Area, the aim of the Continental Free Trade Area is to liberalize trade, to eliminate tariff and non-tariff barriers to trade. Once we do that, we will then be able to facilitate the free movements of goods and services between member states. So we need to, that liberalization of trade is key to increasing intra-Africa trade.
Please bear with my very simple thinking on this. If we're talking about liberalizing trade, one thinks of a country like Togo, for instance, and many other West African nations. You make a phone call that has to start in France before coming back onto the continent. Sometimes even when you want to go to certain parts of the continent, you have to fly out of the continent so that you come back into the continent. With these countries that have such a deeply entrenched interest in certain parts of the countries, how do you see them relinquishing that kind of power? Some men had talked about, $450 billion, being created through the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement.
Yeah, I must mention that the African continent, remember, it has a population of about 1.2 billion people. And in addition to this, it has a a GDP estimated to be around or more than 3 trillion, is a bigger market that the member states need to exploit. Now, I think probably one of the reasons, in addition to these, some of these countries that have trade relations with their former colonial power, and they export most of these products in raw form, like raw materials, it actually inhibits. You end up in a situation where most countries are producing and exporting almost the same raw materials, and it becomes difficult for them to trade with each other. And some of them are complaining about a lower or limited domestic market. Now, when you are opening it, when we say you are opening it up, it means that you make it easier for African countries to trade among each other. And it offers the African continent is an unexploited market. Infrastructure needs to be developed, and it has one of the fastest growing broadband in the world. So now when you do that, when I say opening it up, it means you make it easier for countries to trade. Ensure that you eliminate this tariff. Ensure that you eliminate all these things that make it difficult for us to trade with each other as Africans. So if we do that, we will be able to increase intra-Africa trade. Basically, we need to exploit the unexploited trade potential in Africa.
With all the promise that this has, one can only put so much positive energy into it that the dream is realized, perhaps not in my generation, but in generations still to come. Thank you for your time this afternoon. Mr. Professor Joel Eita is from the UJ Department of Economics and Econometrics.